Hi, Ramana. Good morning.
So let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes. Thank
Okay. Yeah, I think you are asking about whether we can use OData services with Angular.js or not. Yeah, that's obviously we can use it because as we know that we are using web components, so there should be definitely different approaches. But how do we know that what is our essential things? So if we uh, look at the component here, what I was talking. So SAP intentionally it tries to control the middle layer. When I say middle layer, this component software component called SAP Gateway. So this gateway currently only supports SAP specific data sources and non-SAP data sources. Though it is OData services are well supported, we need a connectors to interact with the respect to DB. Now for HANA DB, etc., and for wherever SAP system is there, for those itself SAP is providing the connector. For other landscapes, SAP is not providing the connector. Now to directly use AngularJS interfacing with SAP HANA, we need a connector where SAP is currently not providing any connector. Okay, so but how do we know what we can use? So there are connectors available out there. Uh, so this is a place odata.org. So like I said, this is a universal governing body which sets the system etc. into place. So if we look at here the section called ecosystem. So we have two categories. So one we called as producers and the we called as consumers. So producers are nothing but the connectors. So we have lots of connectors which support OData services. In this, one of the connectors is our gateway. So if I type here open UFI, so SAP gateway is a connector name. So if you say SAP gateway is one connector. So SAP gateway software allows us to understand OData. So if whenever we are trying to read the data, so we can SA S4 HANA system as well as here they technically say SAP and non-SAP applications we can connect. But what they're referring to is Oracle DB, where any of the application and their ecosystem, Ariba products and other Java systems, their products which they are dealing with. So maybe there are ways to do. So we have a certain um, log4j is Apache log4j is one. So Apache log4j and OData 4j. So these are some of the we do have certain libraries. So these all we call it as one which tries to connect etc. Let me this is one, but Olingo is better one. Olingo Apache Olingo. So Apache Olingo is a better library for Java etc. Where see, these all are like additional libraries and connectors. So which try to see the type of programming language you are using. So in case of Java, we have something like connector called Olingo, Apache Olingo. So these connectors, etc., what they do is, uh, what are the underlying DB? So Java uses JDBC and it tries to connect. And similarly for Angular, if at all now we want. So for similarly here we can look for which supports Angular. So here I need to see for CAP and these two are related to our SAP. And for Microsoft based one, we do have certain and even IBM also we have certain connectors. So in consumers, if I come here, if you see there is one called Kendo UI, etc. This is so Angular, React, Vue we can use and any of this using it supports all OData services. But maybe we need to use additional packages like SDK. Now UFI SDK software development kit enables us to use and you have all the programming syntaxes etc to consume OData services, right? So likewise we need some as software development kits in order to interact more efficiently. So there are other ways where third party ways, but those will have limited capabilities. So when I say limited capabilities, see, your programming syntax exclusively Angular won't support this way. Okay, so to support, we need some connectors. So there should be some ecosystem which enables us to securely and communicate between our DB and our application layer. AngularJS promotes open source stack. So it's not actually paid stack. So when I say paid stack, so let me show you actually how AngularJS works. So C data is one that is also there. W3 schools. For anything, you can go to W3 schools. If you go to Angular here, there is a section called AngularJS SQL. Okay. So if you see, you can write all your front-end logic in AngularJS, and to connect to MySQL, we can have to use PHP scripting. So using PHP scripting, here this is a script tag. So today we'll see how do we add script tags, etc. But for your question, so they do write in PHP server-side programming you have to use to connect to the underlying DBs, and this is how generally in AngularJS DBs are connected and you try to write. But AngularJS as a framework is meant only to design the top framework, but it do support module. So here also like every UI framework uses modules concept. So different way they do it. So this is a module loading. So this is like a server side module trying to load. So this they are loading as this whole controller logic. They are trying to connect to some customers MySQL table, and they try to read the data and they try to do binding. So this is how the binding looks in case of AngularJS using PHP and MySQL server. Likewise, we have do scripts for using ASP.NET as a server-side programming language and connecting to SQL. We do have, and this is how the script tag looks like. So we need to ensure that we are able to establish communication securely, and we need some interface to connect as well. So those connectors are different for different programming languages. For Olingo, it's for Java, and similarly Log4j is also for Java, and we do have other drivers as well, where this is one. There are like 4 options are there. This is Syncfusion is one which is providing all the JavaScript UI controls which support complete Angular, React, etc. and all most many frameworks it says. And there is one called Kendo UI. Yeah, I think Syncfusion. I think there are only 2 listed as part of here. So there is one more option, like I said, Node.js has we have lots of. So you can go to npm. Here you can look for Angular OData. So, but these are not full scale. Where if you're someone who is trying to build production ready applications, then these are not meant. But for your understanding and for your usage, if you're trying to build an application, then you can use some additional libraries which are as packages. Some other people have tried to provide us some open source way of connecting to the underlying what do you call the data, etc. So there's Angular OData resource. If you see here, they have given you how to install, etc. So here it supports OData v4 with expand entities, everything it supports, etc. So see, problem is any issue comes with this library. It's if you are trying to write some queries and it's failing it, the support, etc. may not be available always. Okay, that's the problem with this third party. So some developers communities they try to actively publish, but these are not very consistent. Okay, so they'll serve you the purpose where they are not actually the real authentic. But the one listed on odata.org are some trusted, at least some you will have some long-term maintenance, etc. And now in this case, OpenUFI is just one programming language using which we can consume OData v2 and v4 services and we can build. So SAP OpenUFI, and in terms of connectors, we do have SAP Gateway connector. Hope that answers your question. Okay, so these are some very interesting use cases are there. So there are like lots of live services also. It's not, see, OData is very popular in SAP and Microsoft stack and not very predominantly extensively used in other areas. So other areas maybe they might be not very keen on OData as a layer, but they might be interested in different approaches. But connecting to DB can be done in, say, some prefer using SQL queries, whereas in OData we can use OData queries, etc. So they're similar to our SQL, but we cannot write any SQL queries here. So that's how the difference of connectors comes into picture. So different connectors are there which enable us to do different things. And yes, frameworks are really advantageous. So frameworks bring to table lots of innovations, and definitely those are really. So I think with web components, those things might be more. SAP might introduce more components or software components as well, but that's still very initial stage. It's not very, you know, something we cannot say commit. Now, today, if you ask me, there is any trusted one who we can recommend to customer? No. For Angularjs, I at least even for protection scenarios, I don't think I can suggest you some connector which is really useful. But it's still evolving space, so I think it will take time for some SAP or any other vendor to provide properly. There is one called C data. So C data has lots of connectors. So let me see. C data. Yeah, C data. C data generally it supports lots of DBs. So these have multiple system support, etc. In terms of here also C data. So this is C data is one who generally uses lots of interface and connectors. I just let me see. It is one here. So C data is one some if you are really looking for. So C data it provides one API server where it can securely communicate and connect to all the issues of what are you're trying to ask, right? So at least for now, if you ask me, you can use C data. So C data allows you to using Angular, you can. This is a gateway which it provides, using which you can test all your OData services, etc. So this is how you can connect to the using Angular, you can connect to the OData service. So at least C data is one which I can say it's a little bit of trustworthy, at least for the sake of building applications using Angular as a stack. Okay, so different connectors are there, so we can use respect to connectors. Okay, so let's move on to today's topic. So I think we were talking about frameworks. So we just talked about frameworks, and then we try to understand HTML, CSS using some digital regime, etc. We try to understand the basic elements are those. Frameworks provide much more things. And when it comes to SAP UFA framework, so right now we have 1 lakh plus T codes for the SAP GUI. So if Ktrun is a T code where we can look for all the T codes out there. So there are lots of T codes, but the problem here is, do we have such a huge SAP Fiori adoption as well? The answer is no. So still we are at a very early stage of SAP ecosystem getting evolved. So they are trying to toss around with new technologies, new approaches every now and then. But it's not SAP Fiori. At least it is stable now. But we are not clearly sure that whole SAP ecosystem will be transformed. The UI etc. will be transformed into one way. So that is very too far away, if you ask me. So this is in order to build this simple digital regime, which uses H1 to H6 tags, some paragraph tags, and some anchor link tag, and some image tag. So these are some basic tags which you use. So you can simply put HTML body and inline syntax using which you can add background image or image background color, etc. As well as you can use an image tag, and you can specify source as a picture. To just position on the right, I used a CSS property. To have this image on the right, I just used a style float equal to right. So float, when I set to right, it automatically comes to right. So they're like simple syntaxes: image tag, paragraph tag, heading tag. Heading tags we have 1 to 6 based on size. And then I try to use anchor tag to specify my repository. This is my code repository, etc. So this is a simple application to build. We can use simple tags to identify that any web application uses HTML as the backbone. To understand that, we are trying to use this. And to bring it a nice UI, we use CSS to style it. So to add logic, we use JavaScript. So we are going to talk a little bit about JavaScript as well. So today we'll try to understand why do we use JavaScript, etc. Okay, why do we use JavaScript? So this we'll try to understand with some simple exercises, and as well, like specific to conclude what SAP UFI future roadmap offers. Okay, so we need to understand if SAP UFI is a sustainable language or not for building for the long run. Yes, it's promising right now, at least, for because as long as SAP S4 HANA exists, I do think SAP Fiori as a stack going to stay longer. So WebInfo from 91, it took around 20 years for it to stay on the track, and Fiori as a direction, it's because mobile and tablet form factors. This is a single stack currently under SAP belt, which enables us to build applications for all the three. For one single application you build, they'll be responsibly easily they'll be able to run. I think this approach is interesting approach, and it's going to stay for long. So all apps as on date, even now and then I just try to remember. So there are lakhs of transactions, while the number of Fiori apps, etc., are very low. So there are hardly 13,000 apps as on date. So there's a so we have 1 lakh plus transaction codes. So this is just a simple uh, measurement as such. So as on date, Query app ecosystems. These are SAP shipped one. See, custom ones which we build for customers, those will not be counted at all. So every customer is free to build their own custom Fiori application, and nowhere that number would be highlighted because it is those applications are exclusively used by a single customer. Whereas these applications can be used by any customer. If any customer wants any of, if they are having this particular SAP product, they are free to use. So this ecosystem, even I think SAP will try to um, provide more and more marketplace. So they are trying to transition into that direction where they try to provide some marketplace. And right now, only SAP is trying to build SAP Fiori apps. Maybe we'll see where other vendors also can try to publish in the marketplace with all the which can be used by all customers. Right now, only for specific customer, if they have SAP license, they are building custom SAP UFI solutions. Custom UFI solutions and only SAP is managing the SAP Fiori applications. So this is current direction. Maybe in future the direction can change. So as there is a exponential increase in use cases which SAP as a platform requires, there's more and more need for building more SAP Fiori solutions, so that all these are like all the T codes were not touched for quite so long. Okay, so many of the applications process can be redesigned and simplified for day-to-day usage. So Fiori enables us to reduce the clutter and try to provide more intuitive way to do the day-to-day tasks. So that's the reason we say that SAP Fiori as a stack, as long as S4 HANA exists, it has a huge growth potential. Okay, so we try to understood that web components allows us to use UFA framework with other frameworks. So that is one we try to understand, and we just saw it doesn't look that bad when we try to use other frameworks as well. And okay, so as how do we keep ourselves open and with web components, direction, etc. So it's ideal to, if you understand HTML, CSS, JavaScript, for any JavaScript based frameworks, we need to have our open stack mindset, because any organization, they are trying to adopt open source technologies only nowadays. So nobody is actually building from scratch. If you try to build from scratch, it takes long time. Okay, but whereas open source stack, when you collaborate, more innovations can come a lot quicker. So that's the reason. So Angularjs is open stack, React is open stack, and Vue.js, etc. There are like lots of stacks are there. So if all those require this HTML, CSS, JavaScript as a basics. So if you know the basics right, then using frameworks is all about learning the approach or syntax or the API. By looking at the API, we can master any framework in a given time. So that is apply the principles of these basics of HTML, CSS to any framework, and try to understand how the frameworks concepts are implemented. So once we understand the concepts of specific framework, then we should be able to master any framework. So this is how a future of user experience can be concluded. And with Fury 3, this is how we are expecting. And as more and more products for Ariba, etc., not only as for HANA, if we more capabilities when SAP tries to introduce, with CAP, we are hoping that we can build some solutions for all other SAP products as well. Then with Fury 3, we'll have much more ecosystem. Not just S4 HANA, we'll not be using SAP Fury for building S4 HANA, maybe a larger ecosystem of for all SAP products, we might be leveraging SAP Fury as a platform going forward. So I think this all are known. So S4 HANA is current flagship product, etc. And most of the applications, as majority of users are currently on-premise, and we do have cloud as well. But S4 HANA on-premise is also there. S4 HANA cloud is also there, and the platform which we talk about SAP BTP is a SaaS solution, so software as a service, where it's meant for application developers and customers to build applications, and it's not um, it's like not ready to whatever consumes a kind of service or something. It's just a platform where it has all the tools and development kits. So to build our solutions, it is evolving. When you compare to other cloud providers, SAP is still lagging. If you ask me, they are very far. They are not at the place where other cloud providers are there. But still, what SAP is doing is really in the right direction. So it has stayed so long in on-premise only. I think it's moving to the cloud. I think very next 5 years we'll see a dramatic shift in users. Already I could see the heat during last 1.5 year. We are seeing customers lots of questions on how do we move, or so far from 3 years back I used to see from ECC to S4 HANA, how do we migrate, etc., and what are the scenarios. But now currently the customer requests on how do you move or on-premise to cloud. So those are the things which are increasing patterns. I think next 5 years cloud will have equal share as that of on-premise is what I feel. And even it reduces overall cost. Okay, so if every customer is trying to play safe, and they are trying to invest to some extent in the cloud space as well. So we'll try to see both approaches of how do we manage Fiori applications on-premise and cloud. And this is week 1. So I think week 1 the concepts we try to complete it. So exercise part, I'm just going back to exercises. So we do have exercises. So in terms of exercises, web development basics we have to do. And this is what a basic HTML simple web app looks like. Let's go to our IDE. So this was a CV application. So this is a basic building block of any web app. We have a head section, and then we have a body section. So this is so like I said, any browser, the top section is your head and the whole page is your body. So how you're managing your body, it's all depends on this content. So this is how a simple web page looks like. So simple web page can be built using minimalistic code, and this doesn't offer rich capabilities, etc. To reuse lots of features, we take help of or what we call the frameworks. So we use help of frameworks to reduce our effort while building application and use cases, so that we can build scale our applications very quickly. Now let's understand the role of JavaScript. So I'll just take a simple example. Let me run the application first. Okay, so this is what, and so in CSS dot class remember to add dot in external CSS dot class files. Remember to add. So you can use this wherever the CSS you want to reuse it using class name, we can reuse it. But if you wanted to only one particular location you want, then using ID, we call it as ID selector. You can use a property called ID instead of class equal to intro. If you say ID equal to first name, then you have to use this pound or hash character to identify. So you can use ID based, but we don't use ID based in OpenUFI, the SAP UFI. We use only class based, but this is also available as part of selector. And we have for all elements. So wherever the tag is used. So if you specify star and then instead of dot hash, or if you put star, then everywhere it will be applied. So if you are using it for the specific element or any element, so everywhere if you want to apply, suppose some space or width or border, etc., we want to specify. So those all properties we can list under star. So everywhere it will be applied. Okay. So this is these are some of the ways by which we can use. So these are some selectors, and yes. So we understood it for CSS we use link tag. For JavaScript and any scripting we use script tag to define external JavaScript. And we do use this concept of functions and arrays and some of the JavaScript methods. So these are some basic methods are necessary. Again, W3 Schools is your go-to place for some basics of JavaScript concepts. So you can go to the basics of, you can follow a couple of sections of basic syntaxes for getting used to the JavaScript syntax, etc. Okay, so I'm going to discuss some of the basics as part of today's exercise. Let me go here. So, so this is I used a simple web page, which using some tags, some HTML tags, some paragraph tags, etc., and I added some CSS. So this is just a CSS. I added it. But now what I'm trying to do is now I'm trying to introduce JavaScript. So how do we are going to add logic to this particular page? So I have taken a simple function called static function called calculate. So the moment I click on it, so I'm trying to do adding of two numbers. So I hard coded two variables and I'm trying to do the sum of the values. This is a simple function. So I'm the moment whenever I click on calculate, so the logic part we are trying to say that uh, when I select on calculate, try to do some add some logic and try to display the value. So here the moment I click on calculate, the sum of values 3 is getting displayed. So so to make it more appropriate, I try to use a simple calculator here where I have taken using HTML, two input boxes I have taken and I placed a button. So when I try to use any dynamic value, so above is the static one where here I can dynamically I can select the value and accordingly the when I say calculate, I'm going to use a logic to display the output as sum of the two numbers. So we are trying to use some additions, subtractions, multiplication, etc. So all those things we can try to write logic and we can display. So, but how did we write logic here? So let's understand it. So again, we can take a simple HTML section and all script tags can be placed either in head or body, but it's always good to have on the head. Now you can use a simple script tag called script tag in this way. And here if you say we can using functions, so we write functions. So these are like reusable ways of writing and carrying your code anywhere. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a simple function called sum. So in JavaScript, one of the concept is functions. So here's the name of the function is sum. And I have taken here in JavaScript, we don't have any specific data types. So for any data type, we can use var as a keyword. So based on the value you assign, the variable can hold any data type. If you're passing a boolean value true or false, then var is the keyword we use. So like we don't use any specific integer, etc., as a primitive data types. So we use for anything we use var. For local scope we can use let, but that is part of Es6 syntax. And I'll just have to specify that So like in HTML, how HTML5, CSS, CSS3. In JavaScript, what we use is called ES5 in UFI. So latest is ES6, but we are not using ES6 in currently UFI framework doesn't fully support ES6 capabilities. So if any new syntax are there in JavaScript, you cannot use those syntaxes. Okay, so only still it uses ES5 because ES5 was back in 2009 or some. And so when framework was completely built around 2013 around, so they extensively used ES5. I think slowly they are trying to introduce, but web components uses approach uses ES6. So using web components, you can leverage components. You can use ES6. So what is this ES6? ES6 is just like how I'm saying JavaScript version. So CSS we have CSS3. So and HTML we have HTML5. Like similarly for JavaScript, the we call it as ECMA script. So this is a short one, ECMA. So this is the actual our name is ECMA script, but people commonly use JavaScript as a word. But this they call it as E. So we have ES5 as a version. This is a version of JavaScript. The latest version is ES6, but we are still UFI users only ES5 framework. Okay, as on date. Maybe in future they might be providing complete support for ES6, but right now it's very partial. Okay. Only web components support ES6 syntax. So I can just show you quickly in here. Here itself, you can look for what are the features. So if you see here in back in 2009, ES5 was introduced, ES6 was introduced in 2015. These are JavaScript versions, and some of the syntax, if you see, if you these are like well-known syntax. So use strict, we use it in or UFI framework, etc. So these are like string trim is array for each map filter reduce. So map functions, all these functions are introduced in ES5 as part of features. And like these are for every parent JavaScript class, we do have methods. So these are methods. So for each method, map is a method. So for the array parent class, these all are methods, nothing but functions. So now we are defining a sum function today. Similarly, for the parent class, all these functions were defined. So we are just reusing them or we are consuming them to reduce our efforts. So instead of writing the whole logic, we can use this built-in functions. We call it as built-in functions of JavaScript. In ES5, these all are the features which were introduced. So using etc. So what are the new in ES6? So if you are trying to use these syntaxes in UFI, it may not work. So let is not yet supported. So some places it might prompt you error etc. because not all these are supported. Arrow functions. So includes etc. Some of the things are available, some of things are not available. I cannot precisely say that all features are not available. So ES6 features are being added, but not all controls you cannot expect some support. So these are some new features, find index, find etc. And some of these things are not yet supported in UFI. Okay, only ES5 features are supported. All this you can use, but if you're trying to use ES6, you may not be able to have better. So there are other versions, but they are not yet recognized as standards. So now only ES5 and ES6 are accepted as standards by the universal community, developer community. And as on when official recommendations comes, then they give it ES7 or whatever number they'll specify it. Then those features will be a major adoption across all browsers. So browsers also should support, frameworks also should support. Then only we'll be able to leverage the features set which are part of the framework. This is not sorry framework of the programming language called JavaScript. Clear? So this is about the base. Now in our exercises, functions now this var etc. only are supported and not let etc. So to emphasize that why, because ES6 is not supported, that's the reason we cannot use that. And I have taken two variables here, value a as 1. So 1 equal to, if you use, it's called we are loading this value on the right to the left side variable. And in this case variable c, I'm just here in plus acts as we call it as operator, both for concatenation as well as for addition. We use plus operator. And now simply I used a variable c, and the sum of the values I'm storing in my variable called c. Now in order to add this, I'm specifying it where to show this value. So on screen, if you see, when I press on calculate, so we are showing this text and data. So the moment we click on calculate, so we have to, we are planning to show this. So what I specify is, I specify an ID to that particular calculate button, and there I try to set the data. So in the function of what I specify, calculate this value whenever someone tries to call this particular function called sum. So how do we define it? So we have written the function now. So let's see below. So I have taken a simple button tag here. If you see here, there's a simple button tag, and I use the event. So I said that do have events, etc. So these are like HTML which gives us tags, etc. And for those we do have these events. So on click is an event, and I'm passing this function here. So some function I'm passing it. So what is the name of the function you have given? So sum. So some function I'm trying to pass. So when I click on it, it tries to look for any script file is there, and inside the script file it tries to look for the function. So now we have a function called sum, and automatically it tries to show the context which is set here. So here I'm saying some of the values, and here the plus acts as a concatenate operator, whereas here plus acts as a addition operator. So now the output would be displayed. So this is a simple way to understand functions and a script tag. And the same thing, to make it dynamic instead of a static function. So instead of making a dynamic function, we are taking two input boxes. So if you see, I have input box 1 and input box 2, and I specified ID to it. So I specified ID as value 1. Here I specified paragraph ID as add, and here the output is getting displayed. Now to read the input, I specify value 1, value 2 as my IDs, and I'm reading the entered input value. So here value, whatever value is there, so I can set a predefined value as well. So if we, as a static function, we can predefine value also, we can set. So if we are hard coding it a predefined value, so whenever we using it, so the predefined value would be appearing. So this JS example. So this is a page which we are overwriting it. So this is JS example. So a moment we have it. Maybe let me save this somewhere outside. Save as desktop. So here we are using a separate function. I'm using second function for this one. Where is this one? This is our application. Okay. So if you see, I have added it outside. So external CSS, etc., they got removed. And whatever value we have set, those values are automatically appearing. So it's all about using CSS. So without CSS, this is how it looks, and with CSS, this is how it looks. So externally, we are loading. If basic HTML building block will look this way without CSS. So with CSS, we can add some. Uh, so HTML allows us to add input box, etc. CSS allows us to add styling factor, and JavaScript allows us to write logic. So now it is doing the sum of the. So in order to add one more function, all we have to do is we can either write in the same script tag one more function. Here I can write. I can just separate with semicolon, and I can write one more function, function 1, function 2, function 3, etc. Or I can use separate script tag. So I'm using separate script tag, and I have used now a function called calculator. Earlier I have used sum. Now in order to type conversion, whatever value they're entering it, so I'm just reading from the location. So value 1 is the input field 1. So this is the input field 1 we have. So we have a value 1 as input field 1 and value 2 as input field 2. So from these two input values, I'm trying to read the data. So using get element by id dot value, whatever value is there, that value I'm storing in A1. Earlier I hard coded the value. Now I'm dynamically reading the value, and I'm converting it to convert the what entered value. I'm using parse. So this will if because in JavaScript there is no data type. If you're entering in quotes, it will treat as if you see the same example, if I enter in quotes, So it will treat as if I in quotes, if you give it, it treats as string. If you give it as it has to treat it as number. So passint allows us to convert if it all string or etc. into integer type. So if I try to run this, if you see, so 1 plus 2 it shows as 12 because plus acts as a concatenator because now 1 is a string and 2 is a string. If it is a number, it adds the two numbers. If you remove quotes, it tries to do as an addition. So the operator behaves based on the type of value it is stored in the variable. So in this case, this plus operator becomes concatenator if those are strings, and it becomes an addition operator if those are numbers. So in order to control those kind of issues, etc., user is entering any text, etc. So we are trying to use passint. So if you enter alphabets, etc., those will be automatically rejected. So variable a1 and b1 are dynamically storing, and same again sum of the two numbers I'm doing, and I'm just setting to the function. So this is how a simple JavaScript would be written. Now we are using script tags, etc. To define. So we understood that logic we can write, but there are like different ways. We need not to always use a script tag this way. We can use reusable code. So JavaScript, in order to reuse, what we do is I can write the same logic in separate file also. Just like how CSS we have written in separate file, I can write the both functions. Now, if you see some function I have written in separate file called code.js, and the calculate function, same functions I have written in separate file. So both, instead of using a script tag, I write my functions inside one JS file and I load this file. So how do we load it? So for that, this is how I can write. So I can use a simple script tag in the head section saying code.js. So this is the approach we use in OpenUFI, and any frameworks uses this approach. So if you see a link tag uses shows that all the CSS is available here, and script tag shows that all the functions or logic is available in a separate external file. So code.js now has same example. If I using external script, so I have used a simple calculator here, and I used same. So if I run this application, so external JS application, you'll see the same output. So if you see here, so it runs the same logic, etc., and there is no change in uh, how the or output or anything displays. So everything is same. Only thing is we separated the logic and we have placed it in, instead of script tag, we try to place it in an external file. So this is how basic building blocks can be works. How a web page works is the underlying tools, etc., are HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. What frameworks they do is they use these three and they try to create all lots of controls which can be straight away consumed. So frameworks are nothing but collection of building blocks which are which promote wider adoption, quick usage of all our application. Now let's look at our framework ufi.sap.com, and if you go to the API, so here we have lots of libraries. So these all libraries are built using JavaScript only. So using JavaScript, lots of libraries have been shipped to us, and we are able to readily use all these libraries. So in this sap.m is most interesting one, where these all controls under M are responsive. That means if you use this control, it will automatically adapt to your mobile or form factor, etc. So if I see this application now, so if I click on inspect here, so you have on the top, you have something called emulator. If you see on top, there is an emulator. So this is an emulator where you can test your page in any of your application. So once it turns into blue, you just have to minimize this. Then automatically there would be an emulator available to you. So you can test this application in iPhone X and you can set how it looks in 100%. So this whole page is built using UFI. And if you see, automatically the same content has been adapted based on available space, etc. So these all are part of using SAP UFI only. This particular page is also built. So in a tablet, this is how it looks. I can set the to 100%. So automatically the screen is getting adapted. So this we call it as a responsive behavior. And no matter how you're accessing it, based on the available screen space, the controls can adapt automatically. For that, we use something called Bootstrap Framework. Okay. So I'm just going to talk a little bit there. I'll go there. So here again, in this section, you have something called Bootstrap. It used to be there. Yeah, this is Bootstrap. So Bootstrap is again open source framework So which enables, so in that also there are versions. Of course, we won't go there, but Bootstrap is the framework which first introduced the concept called responsiveness. So responsiveness can be achieved uh, by making use of all. We need not to build multiple applications for different mobile separately. So far, uh, so the shift in happened only after this Bootstrap framework, where earlier every time you have to build an application, you have to build application for mobile separately. You have to use a different programming language. You have to build separately. Now the scenario has completely changed. You just build one's application, and it should be able to run in all the devices. So that's achieved using Bootstrap. So I'll go to our application back. So let's see our application and where all these concepts are sitting inside our framework. So if we open our first project or first application which we have used. So I'm just going back to my. So this is a first application where we build. So let me run this first. Take a while to run. It's a simple hello world application I think we have written. So we have an let's learn SAP Fiori. So we have written a simple application. So if we look at the folder structure, so all the MVC concepts, etc., are organized in our folder structure now. So using framework now, our first application we have written. Like let's understand the structure now after looking at the whole frameworks concept as such. So we have written a simple first step earlier, where we said that let's learn SAP Fiori on our day 1 or day 2 class. So where if you see the structure now back again, so if you look at the structure, so this whole framework, it has been organized, well organized. So how it has been organized is if you see this was now we are writing using XML as a syntax. So XML looks like HTML tags, but HTML tags are predefined tags, whereas those cannot be extended, those cannot be tweaked, etc. But for framework advantages, all the controls. So text control, SAP can introduce a property called text. Today it has introduced. Tomorrow it wants to refine. It wants to add some along with text. It want to add something called tooltip. So it can add tooltip, etc. So they can add any new properties. They can extend the base controls. So the basic building blocks can be extended and new features can be shipped for the developers to reuse the code. So that's the advantage of framework. So we write using XML tags, and all these tags are listed in your API. So this is where your API comes into picture. And I turn off the emulator now. So framework, by using these particular set of libraries, we can build responsive applications, and those are bundled in the framework. Along with said, they'll provide all the controls which have lots of features. Now, if I take action list item in this case, so it has you have to look at the property section. There's a property called text, and so we do have aggregations. Aggregation association I'll talk in subsequent classes, but if we are familiar with all the concepts, it's perfectly fine. So if you see for each control, we do have specific version. So when that feature has been introduced, so this is a UFA version which they are referring to. So many new features can be accommodated for this control. We haven't seen any changes recent, but you can pick carousel for example. So we can check the property section. So if you see here, it's available. So there is one library called show busy indicator. This got deprecated, so it is removed. So certain features can be removed all the time, and certain features can be added. So if you see custom layout, using custom layout etc. has been added in 1.62. So we can define many pages and we can add a loop as well. So there are like some new features can be extended for this particular frameworks based libraries, whereas the base whatever standards universally all browsers support, those HTML, CSS, JavaScript could be the same, but your frameworks offers this additional flexibility. That's the reason they users, as a developers, we try to use frameworks to reduce our development effort, and quickly we can build new solutions using frameworks. So we write in XML here all the syntax. So we use all these tags. So if I have to use carousel here, I just have to use M library is already loaded. For that loading of library, we use something called namespaces. So by default, all the libraries are using a namespace M. Now, if at all I have to use any charts, etc. So, so charts, if you see, it's part of a different library altogether. So let me show this. So we have something called Viz library. So other than this, so this is a Viz library. So sap.viz is an external library which is used for your charts, etc. So let me first show here. So if we, so all SAP ship libraries are here. So SAP uses inbuilt jQuery, so we won't use jQuery at all. So if you see here, APF is one library. These all are not responsive. If at all you're building it, only the controls. If you use M library, those are responsive. If you use outside any of these controls, there are limited capabilities of. They are meant for desktop. If not defined under M, then generally they are meant for desktop only. So if you're using something like APF or chart or anything, they will run on your mobile, but they are not mobile first. So it's not recommended to use these controls for mobile scenarios. If your scenario is mobile, only use M controls. If your scenario is desktop only, then you can use any of these libraries, other libraries apart from M as well. Okay. So here now to load other libraries. So what do we do in our application? Now, if I have to use like was saying, me take. So I was talking about Viz. So if I have to load a Viz library, so here I can select sap.viz.ufi. This is the namespace. So how do you define the namespaces? I can specify this way. XML namespace. I can specify as Viz. And here I can define the library. So this is how additional libraries will be loaded. So once we load the libraries, those libraries, in order to consume it, we just have to specify. So in case this Viz is a keyword which indicates that this is the library a part of this one. So I can specify as Viz, and then I can write what our chart control I want. So we have something called Viz frame. So I can use Viz frame here. Okay. So again, everything like HTML itself, we have for everything we'll have a closing tag as well. So inside this, we can use all the controls which are part of this frame. So this is how we load additional libraries when required in our view. So same thing for loading libraries, we use a different syntax when it comes to controller. So in the view, this is how we load the libraries, and in controller, if you look at it, so in controller, we write all the logic in JavaScript. So logic here, JavaScript, it's externally will write. So the external file is in our case is our controller file. So it is organized under controller folder. So any new pages you're adding it, so all the controls will list it under controller folder, and any views we are trying to add it, we'll try to add in the view folder. So it's organized way of having it. So all these libraries here are loaded using SAP UI.define. So here, if at all I have to use the same Viz library in the controller, if I wanted to write, so what I can do is I can specify instead of dots. So if you see here, we are using a dot as a separator. Here I can use the same library to load it. So I try to load using SAP slash. You have to use slash in controller, and I can give any name. So this is if you see the function. So we just understood that we use functions. So this whole page is a function where controller, I can specify a name. So any name you can use. So I'll call it as Viz. So if I use the keyword Viz, then automatically this library would be used to understand that we are trying to use controls from this particular library. So this is how a library is loaded in case of controller. And if you look carefully, if you see MVC here, so MVC, the whole application we are building using MVC, right? So MVC itself is a parent class. If you see here that has been declared here in the namespace MVC. It's a part of core library sapui.core.mvc. So we are loading this MVC as a namespace. So any library if you want to load, this is how we name it, and we have to prefix that control with this particular name. If no prefix is given, that means all these controls are part of your M library. So XML name, so there is no name given here For this MVC we have defined, for this viz we have defined. If there is no name, that means they are part of M library. By default, we use M libraries. Whenever we need specific libraries, we load the libraries in view or controller area as and when required. So this is a basic structure. Okay. Now this application I'm trying to extend. So in JavaScript, in specific to UFI, we do have some built-in lifecycle methods. So I'll try to just quickly explain what lifecycle is. Rendering. So we do have, so these are good to use, and practically not much of a difference they bring in, but they're good to know. So we do have some built-in lifecycle methods. We call this as lifecycle methods, where each of the methods can be used. So on init, on after rendering, on before rendering, on exit. So these are the lifecycle methods which we have. So I'm just going to do a quick simple exercise to understand. See JavaScript. We have the standard methods like arrays, etc. Those are JavaScript concepts. Whereas UFI framework has created some like say we created a sum function, right? So similarly, SAP framework has created some built-in functions called it as lifecycle methods. So these lifecycle methods are no matter which application you're using, all these applications use these lifecycle methods. So it's like SAP's way of defining it. So SAP UFI framework defined. We did not define it. SAP framework has defined as on init, on after rendering, on before. So what are these and when to use? By default, when your application is loading, so it tries to look at see index file is a one or component is a file. So if you're running from launchpad shell, then component.js is the file which is referenced for running your applications. If you look at here, and if you're running as a standalone, then index file will be there. So if you look at it, so the index file, so specifically, so here even our UF application also we are using HTML only, HTML head body we have. But if you look carefully, we do have one called script tag. So script tag has something called Bootstrap. So this is a Bootstrap concept. It's inherent in the framework. So in order to add all the controls, how do we know that all these controls libraries are can be used, right? So HTML, because browser has the built-in built-in HTML CSS support, it's able to understand. So that's the reason I did not load any. So when we are writing this simple application, we did not load any library because browser inherently its building blocks are HTML CSS. So it understood. But for how does it understand these libraries? So for that we need to specify that we need to load certain libraries. So how do we load is we using script tag externally we are loading all the libraries. So SAP UI.core.js contains all the framework. So if you look at this particular library, it contains all these libraries. So all the libraries, what are listed here, every library is part of this particular simple line. So in externally, we are loading all the libraries. So these libraries are loaded using a simple script tag. Okay. So we do have certain features which are given. So this to add CSS as part of script tag only they included. The CSS classes are all shipped using one single theme called now we are calling it Fiori 3 theme, the Quartz theme or etc. Bailey's theme if at all you want to use, that's a Bailey's theme we can use. So SAP Bailey's theme. So this is Fiori 2.0 theme. So all these theme classes are added as simple parameter. So all the libraries are loaded as a script tag, and one of the parameter is theme parameter. So to manage CSS, we use this tag. To manage our framework, we use this source. So these two are enabling us to load in terms of script tag. Okay, there are like other options, etc. So those we need not to get into those for right now. But simple understanding is how the JavaScript is enabling is to add framework directly. So this tag is enabling us to add UFI framework to our HTML based simple HTML. So if we are not adding the script tag, our application is a simple HTML application only. It cannot actually have large scalable application we cannot build. So this script tag is allowing us to do that. If you look at the body, we used a div tag to efficiently use the space. So there's a simple div tag, only one div tag is there. But if you look at it, there's something called tag called component. So component, this is a container. So inside the body, we define the component. So component is a high level parent container for the application. For each application, one component acts as a container. So this, in this case, if I have to specify it, so I'll come back to the lifecycle methods, but the hierarchy is, so index.html is high level. I mean, first trigger point, you can call it as, for standalone apps. So when you run the application, you select index.html, then it will run as run it. If you see currently we are running this application as index.html. So when you're selecting preview option, we do select preview option. So we are selecting index file. So index file is our starting point. So this is trigger point I'm talking about. So this is starting point. But if you're running the same application on a launchpad shell, so if I go here, I'll click on run configuration. So this is a place where we have run configuration. So here we can add a configuration. Okay, this is a JavaScript concept. Let me not go here. It will be unnecessary confusing. So in the BS, I'll show it. So there SAP has will show you different additional customization which it has done on top of this. So here, when I'm trying to run this application, so here I cannot run on Launchpad shell because I don't have that sandbox added here. So in local environment, I cannot run that way, but I can run using preview option itself. So in the preview option, if you look at it, so here we have something called FLP. So for this application, it is not there, but when we are running using some template, we generally be able to run the application using FLP as well. So here currently only no FLP is there, but with FLP we'll have one more run configuration. Those run configuration enables us to, if you're using a run component, it uses component.js as your trigger point. The contention is, so component is parent container for apps running on Launchpad. So I'll call it as LPD Launchpad. On the Launchpad, when you're running, then component will be your trigger point. So this would be your starting point. Okay, this is the place where it all action triggers trigger point. Okay, this is one which triggers your application. So each tile on the Launchpad has one component. So if you have a tile one, tile two, etc. So if you have a tile one, etc. So each tile has one component. So one component would be your trigger point. Inside component, if you look, we do have all the metadata information. So what is the instructions are now? Earlier we used to write everything in component, but SAP what it did is it tried to organize all more cleanly. So you have, if you see here, it has init method. So this is a parent lifecycle method which it uses. And in all our subsequent controls, we use something called on init. So these are like derived methods. Okay. So this has something called manifest, is a descriptive file, we'll call it. It will have all the instructions for the runtime to understand which library to use, which version to use, and which OData service to use. All our model view files, routing information, everything is organized at one place. So this runtime will, by looking at this information, it knows that which version to run and how to run, which OData services to use. All the folder structure which we defined are described in single file. So we call this as descriptor file. So descriptor file allows, and it is loaded as part of your component. So when component is run, by looking at the manifest, the runtime will be able to execute all the underlying folders as an application. So this whole concept, they call it as single page applications. So this concept we call it as SPA. So single page applications. We'll have only single index file and single page applications. So everything is run when we are running component.js. It includes all the modules, etc., and it independently runs. So we call this as concept as single page application, SPA. Okay. So all the new latest application will have single index file. Earlier we used to have lots of index files, HTML files, and all those files they used to link using href tags. So anchor tag they used to use. So if you see traditionally internet, earlier they used to use href tags to link to multiple pages. If you look at Wikipedia, still it uses lots of href tags. So all the tags are, if you look at it, to connect two pages, If you see, even the Google currently what we are using all are hyperlinks. So we are using hyperlinks to, this is one index, this is one HTML page. Now if I have to access this one, this is another index page. So here multiple pages, etc. we are accessing. Multiple pages, there will be lot of latency. So loading this images, data, etc. But using single page concept, all your content, etc. will have only single index. So that's the reason we call it as index. Index will give us all the hierarchy, top level hierarchy, and all the subsequent pages can be included as part of our single page approach. So all our application, one single application will have one single component, and that component will tell us what all things are required to run the application. Okay, so I'll stop it here. So maybe we'll do this lifecycle methods exercise on Monday, and it's very simple exercise. So likewise, we do have once component is triggered, then from manifest it again reroutes to the main view. So in the manifest we define which is the root view. Okay, if you see here, it says the in on the routing section, it says which is a root view. So in this case, root view is or what is the view name? View one. So if you see here, it says root view one is target one. So target one refers to your view one. So by default, your first manifest instruction is to load view one, and view one will correspondingly look for the logic which is available. So view one, if you on top, if you see, it loads something called UX demo controller.view1. So this loads all the logic residing in the controller folder called view1 controller. So here then starts the lifecycle methods. So inside this, what are lifecycle methods are there? Those lifecycle methods get invoked. So when you're running for the application for the first time, component from component, again the manifest from manifest, again the view one to view controller, from controller there comes the on it. So inside on in it, all the logic, etc. Which is specified would be your starting logic. So first logic, anything is there. First logic invocation happens one specified in init block. Right, in init block. So init block is the first logic invocation, JavaScript logic, anything we write. The first invocation block of method is on init. And they are like on after rendering. After rendering the application, if at all we want, we can use on after rendering. So just there is slight difference. So we'll do this exercise on Monday. I think I'll stop for today. I think these are some of the fundamentals and basics we have seen. From Monday, we'll discuss in detail about Fiori administration and managing cloud as well as on-premise, etc. So those topics we'll deal. Hope any questions, or are we good?
No.
Okay. So you can pick this week exercise as a simple application. So you can try to use any of. I'll try to place one in the GitHub repository. I'll try to place one. What do you call? So now you can build a simple calculator application, which we have seen, or any as a weekly exercise. You can try this activity. You can build. You can use some HTML, CSS to build some simple calculator application and add logic to it, and JavaScript. So using JavaScript, you can try to add some logic and try to make it a simple application where you can do different functions. So we added one function called sum function. So similarly, some multiply function, divide function, subtraction function. You can add multiple functions, and using some CSS and etc. you can make it a working application. So this exercise you can try. I'll show you how to use the building blocks and build some nice calculator application out example as well. I'll try to show. But this exercise you can pick it up as an activity for this week, where we can brush up all our UFI skills and we can try. If possible, you can try this calculator example in UFI as well. UFI using our basic button tags, etc., which are available, input box, etc. control. So you can take help from ufi.sap.com. So here you have samples. So you can take help from here, where you will find, if you type for button, you'll have button control. And you can try to use some of the, see all the code snippets you can refer to here. So you can use button tag this way, and you can pick some of this button and input tag. So these are the one which you can use for building an application in UFI. The same calculator example, if at all you have to build, so you can make use of this input tag as well as sap.m.input and your button tag. These two tags alone are sufficient for building a calculator application, and we'll try to use an input tag. So this with this ends our beginner session track, where beginner basics. Okay, so we try to understood all the basics tools required, and then what all HTML basics fundamentals are, etc. And I think this is good to start for anyone. So if any questions are there, we can definitely discuss. And it is recommended to understand these concepts very well, so that when we try to do further exercise and etc., we'll try to dig deep into only UFI part, and that we'll have better understanding. Okay, thank you. We'll meet on Monday.
Okay.